whenever somebody is doing, you know what's the opposite of copycat? Adbol. All right, adbol. Okay, cool cat versus adbol. Anyway, we don't just imitate people who are not Muslims, unless you see some people say, imitate. How come you're driving a car? No, that's not what the hadith speak about. When it comes to a matter of technology or something useful, that's fine. But when it comes to social customs, like piercing this and piercing that and doing so many crazy things. You remember that girl who was fired from her job, and she accused the employer of discrimination because she had to have an earring in her tongue and she was serving food? I mean, why do we have to do that and hurt our bodies and do all this crazy thing? What purpose does it serve? So I think we need to ask an essential question. What for before we say haram? Why? What is it? Why? What? Except just to, again, to be a copycat. A Muslim is not a copycat. Okay? You want? I think that question was in written form before already, so you can go ahead. Okay.
What do we say or explain to non-Muslims when they claim that Islam permits wife beating using one verse of the Quran in Surah Al-Nisa? Surah Al-Nisa.
Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry, I should have given you the mic. Okay. Go ahead.
The question was, what do we say or explain to non-Muslims when they claim that Islam permits wife beating using one verse of the Quran in Surah Al-Nisa?
Okay. In the presentation yesterday, I raised a very important question of how to understand the Quran. And one of the things that I said, if you use cut and paste approach, take something out of context and leave all other text in a given subject, obviously you'll come up with the wrong conclusion. And people who say that are one of two. Either they are totally ignorant of the Quran and what it says about women, the Quran and Hadith, and as such they just read and say, oh, I caught something, which is actually not a very honest approach, just fishing for something that is perceived to be negative. Secondly, if they know, then they are not very honest. And if they have read the Quran really and read what it said about women, then they will try to understand that ayah only in the context of what the Quran and Hadith says about the treatment of women. To start with, and that since the question is very important, before we get to that particular ayah, what is the context? What is the broader teaching in the Quran and Hadith about women? Number one, the Quran, and by the way, those who ask this question are mostly Christians, and they forget that in the Bible it says that women is the one who tempted Adam, and she brought that curse to mankind by and she's the origin of all evils, as some fathers of the church. But the Bible itself says that she was the one who made Adam eat from the tree. The Bible itself says that the women's suffering during their pregnancy and childbirth is a reminder of that original sin and a punishment of God for tempting man to eat from it. It is right there in the book of Genesis. But you don't hear that in sermons on radio or churches. They're very selective. But when it comes to the Quran, they're very selective in the opposite way, without taking things in the total picture. And by the way, I'm not saying by any means that everything in the Bible about women is negative, but I'm saying compare with the Quran item for item. The Quran, it's in the book of Genesis. I can get you the exact verse. You just email me and send it. In the book of Genesis, you'll find it easily. Pardon?
The first 2-3 pages, the whole story.
Yeah. If you want, I get the exact verse and chapter numbers. It's right there. And actually can take it from my tapes also on women in Islam. And there is an excellent paper also by a man by the name of Sharif, I think Sherif, about women in Islam. You find it on the internet and several sites. The information is indisputable on this. Compare that with the Quran. And the Quran says that men and women are created from the same nature, same soul. You find that in the beginning of Surah An-Nisa, Surah number 4. Nowhere in the Quran does it ever point the finger to woman as being responsible for the sin of man. In fact, in Surah Al-A'raf, Surah number 7, when it deals with the story of Adam and Eve, it used the dual language. They disobeyed Allah. They ate from the tree. They sought forgiveness of Allah. They were forgiven. Not one ayah in the Quran point the finger specifically to women. Number 2, in the economic rights, women have been given their economic rights to own and dispose of property the way they want. they were giving more advantage than men to compensate for the inheritance, difference in inheritance share. Because women are more privileged than men financially, because they're always on the receiving side during engagement. At the time of marriage, she's the one to receive the marital gift, and it's hers. It's not to be given to anyone else. It's her gift. If she has property, she doesn't have to spend a penny on the household. If she earned money during her marital life, it is entirely her own security and investment. In return for that, of course, there is difference in share, not because women are half of men, but it has nothing to do with gender, but the financial responsibility that Islam put on the male side of the family. So, in the social sense, the women were treated like almost property. Many of them, unless you talk about a rich and noble woman like Khadija. But most of them were not really treated well. You know, of course, that they used to bury their girls alive. You know, women were used and disposed of. The person can marry limitless numbers and make discrimination between his wives and all of that. Quran came to change that, limit the number to maximum of 4, discourage even having more than one wife if one is not able to be just and fair among all of them. You see, lots of things that were far ahead of its time. The Prophet, about the treatment of women, the Quran is quite clear on that. No, not just pick one part of the Quran and leave the other. What does the Quran say about treatment of women? Number 1, it says وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, that you should dwell with your wives in kindness. In kindness. The Prophet ﷺ reinforces that. He says the best of you is the best to his family, and I am the best of you to my family. It is in that context that you can understand that exceptional case of known as nushuz. And nushuz actually in the Arabic language mean haughtiness and arrogance. And even if a wife happened to be very arrogant and very disregarding, in spite of the fact that her husband, or assuming that the husband also is doing his duties, become very arrogant, doesn't give any respect or any, concern to her husband. Even then the Quran says you have to exhort them, to talk to them kindly. Most women would respond at that stage. And then it says, all right, if they keep in their wrong ways, then you sleep separately from them. You live in the house, but you don't sleep in the same bed. That means to suspend intimate relationship. Any woman who feels that her husband is so upset that after all this exhortation, he's not even interested in sleeping with her, she probably might be moved because of her nature to try to correct herself and talk matters and resolve that issue. But there could be also an exceptional cases where some women in some cultures are so unreasonable. Some men are like that also, that people sometimes would not straighten unless there is some sense of discipline. But does it mean really beat? Did any of you see my book or read called Gender Equity in Islam? Some have, and if you don't have it, actually I think there are more than one site. Maybe Islamic City also might have it. It's all there to read for free also. I discussed that issue in 4 pages actually. So very briefly, basically, that it is not beat. The word beat is not correct. Whack is not correct. Strike is not correct. Because if you look at the dictionary meaning of that, it is much harsher than how the Prophet ﷺ described even using the physical thing. He said something that doesn't cause discoloration. That you should never strike the face. You should never cause injury. Which means in essence really it's a symbolical kind of expression of displeasure, maybe in a place where you don't cause any harm and the body, and if it's not the face or body, there might be something else in the back, that whatever, something very symbolical but not really meant to hurt. Some of the companions even were asked, if I have to, if even the situation arises, what should I use? He said a miswak. You know the miswak, toothbrush, obviously the spirit of it is symbolical. Having said that much, who is our example? All Muslims, the ultimate example. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, who was reported never to have used that against any woman, in spite of the fact that some of his wives even gave him hard time. It happened. The Quran testified to that. Yet he never resorted to that. And then he finally said, وَلَنْ يَضْرِبَ, remember this, وَلَنْ يَضْرِبَ خِيَارَكُمْ. The best of you will never resort to that. But Islam is for everybody, and some people are low in culture, low in understanding. A man with low cultured nature perhaps might find that as a lesser of 2 evils than divorce or severer punishment without any restriction. So it provided parameters even for these exceptional cases. But for better Muslims, they should never resort to that. And the Prophet ﷺ finally said it to put people to shame who beat their wives. He said, doesn't one of you